Hey everyone, I'm back with my co-founder, Taha here, and what we're going to do today is break down everything that's happened in the voice agent space. And if you're new to it or you're a veteran, you'll know how much has changed in a very short amount of time. So the purpose of today's video is to try to put everything together the way it is and kind of take a snapshot of where we are right now and how you can get involved. And if you're a business owner, how you can start to use this technology in your business today.
Mark, thank you for having me. I'm excited. And this video sort of came about because I think there's a lot of not either misinformation or simply ignorance out there. So this is to ideally sort of just give a realistic look at what's feasible, what's not feasible, because we get people coming to us all the time about, can I do this, can I do that? And a lot of these questions stem simply from not knowing how this stuff actually works. So hopefully this will help out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as there are new competitors coming along the horizon, we need to know what is good, what is hype, and what's actually usable. Because a lot of people are getting sucked into the hype, but it really just matters what's usable, what's scalable, and most importantly, what's affordable for your individual use or your business if you're using it in that capacity.
And there's a different answer for everybody. There is not a one size fits all for voice agent. It purely depends on who you are as a business owner or as a company, what your goals are, and how much time or how much money do you want to spend on these solutions.
Yep, exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to first jump into some slides to kind of break down the very high level. If you're brand new to this or if you're kind of vaguely familiar, we'll go through it step by step. And then Taha will take over. We're going to go through this very bespoke Figma design we've put together that breaks down everything in terms of all of these major vendors that we'll be talking about today.
Let's do it.
All right. So again, the point of these slides is to break down what voice agents even are, what are the main competitors in the space, and what their actual use cases look like. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our first slide here. And overall, what is a voice agent? It's known by many names. You'll see AI caller, AI voice assistant, AI phone agent, but they all pretty much center around the same thing, which is hooking up a large language model to some form of infrastructure that enables you to have back and forth conversations with your end users. Now, in general, they're typically speech to text and then text to speech, kind of return back the response. But now with new competitors in the market, we're moving to a place where it's going to eventually be speech to speech, where again, latency will go down a lot. You'll get more human-like experiences. And probably 6 months from now, this entire space is going to be unrecognizable. And again, the main foundation of this is, of course, large language models, whether it be OpenAI, Anthropic, or whichever LLM. These are the foundation and really the bedrock of how voice agents work. In general, when it comes to the design of these voice agents, as these models are getting a lot smarter, the one you pick is less so important, but more so how do you program it or how do you write the prompts that actually fuel that experience. All right, so what are the different layers of a voice agent? So you have one component, which are the transcribers, and this is what gives the voice to your agent. So it's not the text to speech part or the speech to text, but this is the medium through which that text, whether it's incoming or outgoing, is communicated. So you have vendors like Deepgram that enable this audio experience. Then you have the LLMs. This is something you're probably more used to. You have the OpenAIs, the Claudes, the whatever LLM you choose, and each one of these acts as a different brain that communicate in slightly different ways. And then you have the text-to-speech, which up until now, 11 Labs has been one of the major vendors that allows you to clone your voice, create new voices, create derivatives of existing voices. And again, we're moving into a world now where when it becomes speech-to-speech, stuff like text-to-speech is going to become less and less important or less and less used. But for now, the best solutions out there that we've seen with all of our clients in Inbound Agent have been with this text-to-speech infrastructure. And the last thing here, and this is really where you take an agent from okay and mediocre to great and fantastic and usable, is integrating different functions and automations. And you do these through what are called webhooks. And you can imagine a webhook as a form of boomerang that you throw to an API or a service, and after the call is complete, or in the middle of a call, when there's a trigger, it either updates a lead list, it sends an email, it sends a text message, a payment link, whatever. These are the four components that when you bring them together and do them well at scale, you get a very potent voice agent or a series of voice agents for your business.
And if I could add on to that, Mark, so basically, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So the transcriber is basically what takes the input, which is my voice, and actually makes it into words, right? So like it takes an input, a voice to text. Yep. And then the LLM is what actually takes that text and similar to when you're talking to ChatGPT, comes up with a response to that text. And then
Exactly.
the text to speech, I'm sure people watching have heard like 11 Labs. This is where 11 Labs comes in, because it will take that text and then actually put it back into voice with emotion, tonality, all of that. So it's, from the sounds of it, a voice agent is actually three separate sort of entities or robots into one, just really, really quickly.
Correct. You basically meld in three could be separate agents into one that basically has the brain and the legs and the arms and the body it needs to actually fully function.
Yeah, and stuff like Make.com or Zapier or Webhooks in general is basically what take your agents into the real world. How does it interact with a calendar? How does it interact with an email, a text message, etc.?
Exactly. All right. Now, the benefits of voice agents. And you'll probably find tons of videos that are really good at communicating this specific point, but people need to be reminded more than need to be taught. So it's worth going over this again. The number one thing is really the fact that it's 24/7 availability, meaning instead of having someone that works 24/7, which in many businesses, that's not realistic unless you're hiring an agency out in the Philippines or in India to kind of cover your time zone, depending on where you are. This is 24/7 available, doesn't get tired, doesn't get depressed when they're getting the phone slammed in their face multiple times. They remain consistent. And as these become more and more personable, this is going to become exponentially more valuable. And then when it comes to scalability, this is easier to scale, especially from a cost perspective, if this is doing the work of a receptionist or the busy work or admin work that a receptionist spends 4 to 6 hours a day. Imagine a receptionist of a dental clinic that sends appointment reminders every day for 2 to 3 hours saying, hey, I'm just confirming, are you coming in tomorrow? That is a very low value task for a medium to high level skill set. So removing this just frees up your talent to actually do higher value and, more importantly, higher leverage tasks. And the last one is, for the most solutions, especially with the ones we're going to go over today, at least 3 of the 4 are cost effective, meaning assuming you have the right partners, wink, wink, perhaps it could be us or whoever you work with, or it could be yourself, that help build this agent and design it in a way that works well, as a solid prompt, solid workflow, solid automations. This pays for itself, assuming you're using it for the right use cases.
And one thing I want to add onto that, on specifically on the scalability part of it, one thing that we've realized is before voice agents came about, most business owners had one of three options. Most businesses in general have peak seasons, meaning there's seasons where you'll have less phone calls, and there's going to be like probably a 3 to 4 month period of the year where you get double, if not triple, right? For e-com, it would be Black Friday. For construction or roofing, that could be sort of towards the end of winter when all the snow starts to melt, etc. Well, the problem is you had to make one of three sacrifices. Either you overhire, meaning to make sure that you always have capacity for that 3 month period, you have to overhire for the entire year, and you're just end up burning money throughout the rest of the year. Or you underhire and you only hire for the normal times, in which case, whenever that peak comes through, well, now your customers you're not answering your phone, etc. You're losing jobs. Or the third option was you would hire for that 3 month period and then you would fire everybody again. The problem with that, especially employees, if I'm only coming in for 3 months of the year, I'm not really that concerned about how well I represent your brand, because I'm only here for a paycheck for 3 months and then I'm leaving. So it was really difficult to have something that would work throughout the entire year. What voice agents allow you to do is give basically tier one support throughout the year. Whether you have one call or 10,000 calls a day, you always have your voice agent as the first barrier to entry, so that you can have your staff who are there throughout the entire year to deal with tier two level support, regardless of how many calls are coming in, because you know that most of them the voice agents will be able to deal with.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up a really good point that reminds me of something. So we're both in Canada, and when I try to call any of the banks to do something very basic, like just ask for a replacement credit card, I'm on the line for an hour and a half, and I'm juggling whatever activities I have to do to make sure that that moment where someone says hi, I am there to ask for my replacement card. This is the type of thing that creates a very poor customer experience, whether it be a bank or for whatever business. This is cost effective not from just the scalability standpoint, but the fact that technically sometimes I call 5 times to get one issue resolved. If you can start really knocking out all these issues, you're going to improve the lifetime value of your clients. Because if I feel like my issue that I'm about to take care of is going to get solved in a matter of minutes, then I'm more likely to stay with you as a customer. All right, so we're going to go over again the core 4 different systems you can use to actually implement voice agents. And one of them is obviously the newer kid on the block. The first one is Syflo, and this is one that we use a lot when it comes to, let's say, cold calling, because it's easy to set up. There's not much configurability that's needed here, and it inherently links into Go High Level, which is a very popular CRM. And then you have something called Bland, which if you've watched this channel before, you'll know that for the most part, we branded ourselves as the Bland Boys because we're very big fans of the conversational pathways feature of Bland that helps you tackle much more convoluted call center, convoluted workflow use cases that the other providers struggle with. And then, of course, you have the main rival and competitor, which is Vapy, which is really good at higher level conversations, very quick on the latency side, more human-like voices. And in terms of setup, it's pretty much a prompt with the ability to configure different levers, but at its core, it's a prompt. So in terms of accessibility, this is one that's really popular for getting up and running if you don't want to have to spend the time to understand conversational pathways, condition options, and all the different micro steps that are needed to build a more robust agent in Blend. And of course, as of last week, you now have the Realtime API from OpenAI, which is not text to speech. It's one of the first effective speech to speech models that's on the market. And obviously, we've spent all weekend testing its capabilities. And honestly, for now, just like a lot of OpenAI's products, it's overwhelming from the ease of setting it up, but it's underwhelming when it comes to maybe the effectiveness compared to these platforms that have really zeroed in and gone deep in a subject, which is how do you create the best voice assistant? All right, so in terms of use cases, you're going to have two main ones, which is an inbound based agent where people are calling you. Maybe they're calling to book some form of appointment or to ask questions about your business or your hours of operation, or outbound. This could be appointment reminders, could be cold calling, could be somewhere in between. It could be calling warm lead lists, whatever it might be. Now, when it comes to inbound agents, at least what we use here at Inbound Agent is for many cases that are more on the convoluted side, more robust, we use Bland for this. And it really comes down to three main steps. Number one is configuring the underlying infrastructure. Like I said, the way we break these agents down and these agent designs is we'll work with a client, we'll hear and understand all the possible workflows on their standard phone calls. We'll listen to some of their best phone calls to see what is it about those calls that makes them exceptional and helpful. And then we'll actually create a mind map of that entire workflow to confirm that that blueprint makes sense. And once you have that, then we have a really good carbon copy thing to copy using the Bland conversational pathway infrastructure. The next thing is really customizing the conversation flow. And this is where we worry about the devil in the details. How they greet. At what point do they say, maybe not accidentally or by design? Sometimes we'll purposely make an agent say, or slur some words to give more of that human-like experience instead of more of a robotic and sterilized conversation. And then the last part is really implementing this agent, which is hooking that up to a number, whether it be on Twilio or Vonage, and then adding in the different automations, sending the webhooks to these automations to be able to log the transcript, to extract different elements of the transcript, to actually execute certain workflows, or more importantly, to get into contact and start a conversation and continue a conversation with one of your leads.
Yeah, I just thought of a really weird analogy for this, but configuring the infrastructure would be like the skeleton or the bones of your agent, meaning what does it have to do in order to work?
Right.
The customizing the conversational flow would be like the heart. How does that sound, right? Does it sound human? What does it say? What mistakes does it make on purpose or on accident? And then implementing it or putting automations in there is what's like the muscle. So actually make this thing move and make it useful in the real world instead of just having it this self-contained agent.
I love that. But the conversation flow is really the soul of your agent. And that's kind of what the difference between good and great is. Do you have a soulless agent that sounds like literally a chatbot, but with words? Or do you have something that's actually somewhat playful and conversational that people don't mind interacting with, even if it's an AI? Now, on the outbound side, this is where we'd use a lot of Vapy, for example, because we love the latency and the lack thereof. We love how easy it is to design. It's very quick to build proofs of concepts. And when it comes to function calling, it's very effective. So again, similar goal is to create that outbound infrastructure. Are we going to start this triggered by some form of lead list in a Google Sheet, in an Airtable, in Go High Level, in your CRM? Really depends on what is the starting point that triggers this outbound call. On inbound, it's easy because it's automatic. Someone's calling your number, they're going to ask you a question. On outbound, you have to be a bit more thoughtful of what is that first step. The second one is to develop automated kickoff scripts. So again, you have that trigger, but also you want to know, how are we approaching our end user, our end customer, or our end prospect? Are we coming in hot? Are we coming in cold? Have we interacted with this end lead before? Meaning, have they seen an ad from your company, whether it be a Facebook ad? Did they kind of have to read something before getting this call that made them a qualified lead or lead to begin with? There's all these different hidden steps that are involved to make sure that we're improving the script to have a conversation that makes sense contextually to how your lead came about. And like I said before, understanding what that initial trigger is, and if there are multiple triggers, which Taha is going to go way into more depth, both on the outbound and inbound, in terms of what that might look like. This is really important to create that foundation to really understand how this is going to work in the real world. And in terms of getting started, I'm just going to pass it off to you, Taha. Maybe you can walk everyone through exactly what those 3 steps are to put this all together.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's basically 3 main things we look at, or 3 main things you have to do to actually launch these. The first one is actually choosing what platform you're interested in working with. Now, I'm going to go much more in depth on what each platform does over here in a minute. But between the 4, you've got Syflo, Vapy, Bland, and the Realtime API. Once you've actually figured out what platform you need, you can then start building on said platform. Now, it's important. This is a really important distinction because each platform will be configured a different way, meaning the way you build your agent is very, very much dependent on what platform you choose. And then lastly, probably the most time-consuming step by far, testing. And by the way, that testing and launch, there should probably even be another thing that says, and continue testing. Because
Forever.
literally forever. Because as long, the same way that whenever you have a receptionist, new clients, new people come in, there are situations that maybe they're not familiar with, or maybe you have a new product or pricing exchange, etc. So there's a constant testing that has to be done throughout the entire agent's lifecycle.
100%. And that's why working with an agency that is used to testing this at scale is probably more helpful for you, especially for more of a commercial use case. Because the hardest thing is sometimes when you test your agents, you ask them easy questions because internally you want it to work well. What is important is to simulate random conversations that might pop up and see how well do they work when you battle test them. All right, so this was the 50,000 foot view. But the thing about that is that that's not going to build your agent. So we need to know how to actually put everything together and tactically actually build these agents. So Taha, would you do us the honor of guiding us through the 10,000 to 0,000 foot view of exactly what it takes to make this work?
It will be my pleasure. Let's do it. So what you're looking at right now is an actual Figma board that we went ahead and created specifically for this video. Don't necessarily worry too much about copying everything here because I think Mark will actually make this available for everybody in the description. But the goal of this Figma is, let's say you want to build your own voice agent. Where do I start? What are the differences between each platform and which one should I pick to actually start building? Or if I'm already using one, should I consider switching? So what you'll see at the top, like we discussed earlier, these voice agents are actually 3 separate mini agents into one. Now, this distinction is actually really important because part of this trouble or part of the struggle that we deal with, especially whenever we're working with clients, is why is my agent not working the way I want it to? And what's important to realize is each one of these agents or each one of these mini agents can actually throw off your agent or cause it to work unnaturally. Here's a really good example. So the first part of any voice agent, like Mark was saying earlier, is text to speech. Now, why does it matter what text-to-speech agent I use? Well, here's basically a bunch of different reasons, but the most important one is your text-to-speech agent is what will input words into your LLM. So for example, if I ask a question, but the text-to-speech model didn't recognize that it was a question from my intonation, well, then the response won't be a response to a question, it'll be a response to a statement, which can throw off the entire conversation. So it's really, really important to have your text-to-speech agent, or it's really important to have it be good. Now, moving on to text-to-text, which is actually where most people assume that it's all just one specific entity or one specific agent, it's really important to have a good LLM for a couple different reasons. Bigger LLMs or smarter ones take a long time, which means if you're having a conversation and your LLM is slow, well, it's going to cause latency to go up. So it's important not to have it too big and too smart, but if it's not smart enough, well, it might misinterpret, or it might not cause it, or it might cause it not to answer the way you want it to. And here are a couple more reasons as to why it's important for your LLM to be good. And by the way, good here doesn't necessarily mean smarter. It means a balance between intelligence, and speed. And then lastly, it's the text to speech. So the word I hear the most whenever it comes to this is, oh, well, can we just use 11 labs? That 11 labs, this is what they do. They'll take the response from the LLM, whichever one it was, and then try to give it humanity or try to make it sound human.
Yeah, and the tricky part here is that when you add 11 labs into the mix, you always risk adding some more latency to the call, right? Because it has to do an extra step of consulting the cloned or derivative voice that you've created before it actually responds back. So, at least where we are right now, for every level enhancement of 5%, you might have to pay a little bit of latency and compensation.
And here's where it's important to determine what the goal of your agent is or what is the use case. Because if I'm calling into a place like my bank, for example, I'm not necessarily concerned about how quick the agent is. I just want my objective to be completed. But if you're using an outbound agent where somebody's going to call from an ad for say, or for example, well, you need that agent to be quick, otherwise the hang up rates go through the roof.
Yep, exactly.
Here's a couple more reasons why text-to-speech agents are important and what they can do, and why you should consider, or the things to look out for whenever you're choosing one. Now, let's zoom out here for a second. So all of these three things then combine to give you a singular voice agent, as we call it. So the first one I actually want to go over is probably the one that a lot of people here have heard of, which is Syflo. It got really big, at least on the marketing side of things. And I actually really like Syflo for a couple different reasons. By far, if you have no experience with voice agents or no coding experience, I would suggest starting off here for a single reason. It's probably the easiest to set up. What I mean by that is that if you just want a voice agent for your clinic or for your business, you just want set up and you don't have to deal with any sort of coding really, Syflo is by far the best option. Their interface is great. I'm actually going to jump into it right now. Whenever you log into Syflo, you're going to see a screen that looks like this. And to show you how quick it is, I thought I'm actually going to set up a Syflo agent live with you on the phone to show you how quick and easy Syflo is to actually set up. Let's go ahead and set up one right now. I'm going to jump over to syflo.com or .ai. If you don't have an account, just go ahead and create one. And then you're going to be greeted by a screen that looks like this. The simplest way is actually using the quick assistant setup. And then let's say I have a inbound receptionist store. All I've got to do is actually enter in a URL for my company. And right now, what I'm going to go ahead and do, that we found this clinic sort of where near we are. I'm literally just going to take the URL, go back into Syflo, type that URL in, and then it's going to go ahead and create or scrape the website. Now, the reason why it's doing that is to actually create a knowledge base or context as to what this clinic does or what this business does. So you can see that the custom greeting has actually changed from, hey, you're calling into company name to you've called into plastic surgeon in Montreal. So what I'll do is I'll just add a little Dr. MOK. Let's just do clinic in Montreal. How can I help? Then you can choose what voice you want. You can select next. After that, you can select the phone number. In this case, I've already got one connected, but if you don't, it will actually tell you to add a new phone number, put your card in, choose a phone number you like, press next. If you want an action in here, just for simplicity's sake, I'll add call transfer as the action that the agent can take. So for example, what this means is that whenever somebody calls in, can this agent just answer questions or can it do anything else? You can add information extractor. For example, let's say if you want to get the patient's age or the patient's gender. But for this case, let's do call transfer. And then I already have a call transfer tool set up, which is super easy. If you don't have one already, you can just go into actions on the left-hand side and then choose which one of these actions you actually want. If I do call transfer, to create one, all I've got to do is choose what number I want to send it to. In this case, let's just select this one. Now put United States or Canada, validate, and then I can choose when should I transfer this. In this case, all I can say, or you can use the default option, which is transfer whenever the person or the user wants to talk to a human or wants to talk to somebody else, like a manager. Press save, and that's it. You've now created your tool. If you go back into assistance, if I go into open, I can now select the tool that I want. Since they're the same, it doesn't really matter which one I pick. Press next, connect your CRM. In this case, let's just use Syflo because I just want the important thing for me right now is speed. Press next, and there you go. Now, if I go ahead and actually call this number.
Hey, you've called to Dr. Mock's clinic in Montreal. How may I assist you today?
What do you guys do?
We specialize in and plastic surgery, offering procedures like internal bra breast augmentation, tummy tucks, mummy makeovers, liposuction, fillers, and Morpheus 8. Our goal is to enhance our patients' confidence and appearance with advanced surgical techniques. Is there a specific procedure you're interested in learning more about?
Could you transfer me?
Let me transfer you to a human. Please hold on.
There you go. So it's actually not super difficult. If your objective is just speed and getting something on the market or in deployment, Syflo by far is the easiest one. I think that took, 4 or 5 minutes?
Yeah, and they're explaining, and we didn't get to see any form of code or anything that looks remotely like code. So if you're intimidated by that, if you want to dip your feet and just get a feel for what this might look like for your business, this is probably the path of least resistance.
Yep. And obviously there's plenty of features, there's plenty of amazing videos out there, and we're actually going to make a series deep diving into each specific software like Syflo, Vapy, Bland, and as well the Realtime API, but we'll actually have those linked outside of this video. The second platform that I want to actually go over in this video is probably the one that we've used the most extensively by far, which is Bland AI. Now, for Bland, I'm actually going to start off with the pros and cons and then deep dive into how to actually build on platform. So some pros, the biggest one, the reason actually why we stuck to Bland initially, conversational pathways, which is huge. And as a little sneak peek, what that means is you can fragment your prompts. So while in most providers have a singular sort of prompt recipe, Bland allows you to have different prompts depending on the situation. Support, absolutely amazing. There hasn't been a problem that I couldn't reach out to support for. If you're worried about data privacy or you don't want your data going where you're not sure, like if you don't want it sent to OpenAI, for example, Bland has amazing enterprise plans where they will host all of your data and they're actually building the LLMs in-house. And I'll take this straight from Bland's mouth, which is they are positioning themselves as the Apple of the voice agent world, where they want to make sure that everything you need is built within Bland or on Bland. I mean, you don't have to connect 15 different variables together to actually have a voice agent. Everything is available, from the LLMs, the transcribers, the text-to-speech, all of it within Bland. And then where we found the biggest value, or where we were most impressed, is whenever you have conversations that are long. Meaning, for example, we brought this up before, but we're working with a couple different insurance companies. Some of them have really long conversations where we have to go over these really extensive documents. So if your conversation is longer than, say, 5-6 minutes from the AI side, meaning it's giving information and it's not just sort of answering questions back and forth, I would strongly recommend Bland, because it's really difficult to stuff in more and more data, because there's only so much you can stuff within a single prompt. But if I needed to read a 30-page document, that's unfeasible with the other platforms. The cons, there is definitely a learning curve to Bland because of these conversational pathways. It is a bit of a different way. You're not building a singular prompt. And if to make it deployable or to make it work in the real world, there is a little bit of code, especially if you compare it to something like Syflo. But what I want to go now is something that, Mark, I think you touched on a bit earlier, which is sort of the three worlds that we live in. What you're looking at here is the relationship between the user, Bland, and the real world. In this case, I call it automations. So for example, whenever the user is speaking to Bland, Bland responds back. But if, let's say, we need to check a calendar, well, Bland is actually going to a third party. It can be Make, can be Zapier, whatever. And that third party then responds back to Bland, and then Bland responds back to the customer. And you'll see down the road or later in this video, there's actually more complex use cases. They're usually just derivatives of this triangle right here. Now, how do we build on Bland? This is, as you can see right here, this is quite an extensive chart. So let's start here. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest difference, or what makes Bland different, is most providers, Vapy, Syflo, Retail, they're all built on a singular prompt, meaning you have to fit whatever this agent needs to do within a page or two. Anything beyond that, and these LLMs or these models, they get a lot of stuff lost. It's even called lost in the middle. What is it called? I think you might be better at explaining this, Mark, than I am. But the lost in the middle theory?
Sure, it's called lost in the middle logic, meaning you have a very long prompt, and typically prompts pay attention to the very beginning and very end of a prompt. So in a way, it's like dual-sided recency bias. And sometimes if you throw very pivotal pieces of information right smack dab in the middle of a prompt, sometimes it'll remember it, and other times, especially if there's more of a nuanced workflow in the conversation, which happens a lot with live conversations, everyone has different ways of referring to things, getting to the same point. There's almost infinite different ways you can get to the same endpoint. So when it comes to that, it struggles a lot with much longer prompts.
Yeah. So practically speaking, let's say you had to collect 16 different pieces of information from a single user. Well, if you try to fit out all within a singular prompt, it might only collect 10 or 12 or 2 of them and then try to go ahead and book the appointment. But if that's mandatory for you to actually be able to function, well, it breaks the whole system. So going into fragmented prompts. First, let's say trigger comes in, or the trigger is the actual call coming in. Now, the first thing that we typically like to do is we'll actually take that phone number and send it using a webhook, and send it to something like Make. And then Make will actually search up that phone number within the client's CRM, whether it can be Go High Level, HubSpot, Zoho, etc., etc. We're then searching that phone number to figure out, well, look, has this person called us before? Because usually if they have, well, they'll be somewhere within the CRM as a contact. And here's why that's important. The action that we take is based on whether or not something comes back. Meaning, if that phone number exists, well, it's an existing customer. For example, taking Dr. MOK right here. If somebody calls in and they've already had a surgery with us, well, they're probably not coming in to book in another one. So it doesn't really make sense for us to dedicate an entire portion of our prompt to booking an appointment because they don't need one, or they don't need an appointment for a new consultation. What they're probably calling in for is either to follow up or because they're having some trouble. So here's where the first fragment comes in, or the first fork in the road comes in. If it's an existing customer, we'll actually go and because we've received all the information, we can even use the information that came back as to refer to them by their name. So if it was a new customer, it would just say, hey there, how can I help? But if it's an existing one, well, we'll know what the person's name is. And then from there, we'll have completely different forks because we know that 9 times out of 10, they're either calling because of 2 reasons. Either they're having some discomfort, or they want to ask some questions about something. So let's assume that they have some discomfort. Well, then we have another fork within the bland pathways that ask, okay, well, what's the issue? And then once we figured out what the issue is, well, we have another fork that actually says, okay, either these issues are normal, meaning, hey, look, my stomach hurts and it's been 2 days. Completely normal. Don't even worry about it. You should call us back in 3 days if it's still hurting. Or if the symptoms are abnormal, well, then this can be an emergency. It can be something that they had to come in and get checked in for. At that point, we actually want to schedule a follow-up meeting for that specific individual. Then let's say, going back a little bit to how are you feeling? They say, oh no, I'm doing well. I just had a couple of questions. Amazing. You could have a portion here dedicated to just answering whatever questions they had. And then what's really cool about the conversational pathways is because they initially called in and they've already been a customer with us. Let's say that our fork now leads to the person was great. They had no issues. We answered their questions. Well, now at this point, we can then ask them, hey, well, could you please review us on Google? And if they said yes, and these are literally like actual forks within the pathway. If they say yes, well, we'll just send them a review link. And if they're not willing to, no worries at all. So now let's go back. Let's assume that when they initially called, they didn't have discomfort. They just had a couple of questions. Well, you could have a note in there that says, hey, how can I help? Or what are your questions? And answer all of those questions from the knowledge base. Now, what I love about Bland and the power of conversational pathways is because they originally came in as an existing customer, we now have the ability to add a specific node only for them. And what this node says is, a really popular example is, well, could you leave us a review on Google? Because most local services, their lifeblood is their Google Maps, meaning the better reviews they have and the more of them, the more likely somebody is to come to them. If the user says, yeah, for sure, well, you can actually send them a review link through another webhook. And if they don't want to, or they're not comfortable with it, no worries at all. Now, the benefit, and by the way, keep in mind, you could have this within a singular prompt. Here's where the problem can happen. The more stuff you add, this is valuable prompt real estate space, meaning every line needs to matter. So if I were to try to combine this all into a singular prompt, 9 times out of 10, maybe we would never get here. But every single time I am now risking my agent not performing the way I want it to because it's full of stuff that it never actually uses.
Now, one thing that's really important here is although there are forks in the road and although there are pathways, the beautiful thing and the difference between a voice agent and a chatbot is if this was a chatbot, every single time it said feel good, no issues, then it would offer a review or offer to give a review. The interesting nuance here is if you use conversational pathways very well and it's well set up, you could go down the path and say, I have discomfort, and it asks you what the issue is, and it immediately books you in. And then you have a really positive reaction. And maybe a customer says, man, I absolutely love the way you guys treat your clients. I wish all my doctors would do the same thing you did. Now, if you have a good pathway, it might hear that intent and jump to the review link, because it's like, you know what? It sounds like there's some promise here. It doesn't follow the exact pathway, but we can jump from one portion of the pathway to the next because there's an intent there that's kind of latent.
It is, and it's very true. Now, I want to, for the sake of simplicity, we've kept it like this, but you also have to keep in mind that there is so much variability within these agents that there's a bunch of infinite, or not infinite, but there's a bunch of visible lines that come from each of these nodes, because each of these nodes can have 3 or 4 different outcomes. And there's even, like Mark was mentioning, there's even nodes that can be global nodes. If you've seen any of our previous Bland videos, you know that Bland has basically a node that can be triggered from anywhere. Okay, now let's circle back even more, going back all the way to the beginning of the first call. When the call came in, let's say this person was never with us. It's a new number that we don't recognize. Well, we simply ask, hey, how do I help? Now you can have a couple different nodes here, but let's assume, because in most cases this is the one that's the most complex, is looking to book an appointment. Well, in this case, we're actually asking the user, hey, look, well, what are you looking to get done? And for the sake of this example, you could change this for whatever it is that you want, but sticking with the plastic surgery office, we want a list of all the procedures that this user wants. Once we have all the procedures that they want, one cool thing that we've done, and I'm actually going to jump into Bland for real to actually show you what this looks like. This is the example pathway of this specific automation. Where here we're saying, how are you doing today? And then the user, if you've never seen pathway, this is what it looks like. The user asks for a specific price, right? For a specific procedure. But what we're asking for them afterwards is what procedure are they looking for? And then you'll see here right below it, once we've actually gathered all their procedures, we're sending a webhook. And this webhook contains every procedure that the user wants. This webhook is going over to Make. Now, if you've never used Make before, it's basically just a way to send information back and forth from your agent to the outside world. In this case, I've just got a little bit of code, and this code has a list of all of the different procedures that can be had. And what it does is it takes the 3 procedures, if there are 3, it can also be 1, and it will actually take the average of all of the costs and actually calculate them. The reason, by the way, why we're doing it this way is AI models in general aren't great at math. And in general, you don't necessarily want your agents to do a whole lot of math while they're talking. Where they're great at is latency and sounding good or sounding natural, but math is not one of their top skill sets.
For now.
For now.
Yeah.
And what this basically does, by the way, don't worry about copying it. It'll be in the link in the description. What this does is it takes the average of all different procedures that they want, returns that price back into Bland, and then all Bland's job is to actually present, you can see here, present the price in a natural way. And that's all it's doing. Now, going back into Figma, let's assume that they're comfortable with the price. And the reason, by the way, why we're doing it this way is if you try to fit this all into one prompt, you can do this within a singular prompt, but the risk of something going wrong, let's say, for example, they gave the wrong price, or it didn't give a price at all, and it just went directly to booking an appointment. Well, now your clinic has started booking appointments for people who might be unqualified for. And now you're spending your whole day with people who couldn't afford your services to begin with. This is a way to make sure, or these are guardrails to ensure that we're only getting to a specific destination if we wanted to get there. Meaning there is no way for the user in this case to book an appointment without going through this price procedure. And this is different from business to business. If your rules are a bit more lax, let's say, and you can welcome more people, then you might not need all of these different nodes. But if your system needs to be robust and you need to make sure that everybody that gets through it has gone through the exact same steps, this is the best way to ensure that. So once we mention the price and they're actually comfortable with it, then we can get onto a bunch of different nodes to actually retrieve information from the user. In this case, we do get name, get age, get other relevant information. And at this point, we can actually go ahead and book the appointment. Now, here's another piece, or here's another portion where we're actually need to interact with the outside world. When we're actually booking an appointment, what we usually do is we'll try to retrieve all the available slots within 3 to 5 days, right? Just a range, because most people that are calling in, they want to come in within that range. Let's say that none of the slots were suitable for the user. They couldn't come in. Okay, well, now we're doing another request to find all the slots within 30 days. Let's assume that none of those, we can make an entire video on each one of these nodes, but for the sake of length, let's assume that none of these slots were available. In this case, because most people, you'll realize after 2 attempts to book and they still haven't found them, they will usually hang up. So if they after the second one we still can't find it, the robot will preemptively say, hey, look, you know what? Seems like I'm having a bit of trouble finding the best day for you. Let me get back to you. And then you try to retrieve as much information from the user as possible, send it to an admin whose time has now been freed from having to answer all these calls for people who were super simple or for easy use cases. They can now focus on the people who have maybe who need a bit more human touch. Then lastly, let's assume that they actually did find the booking. You can confirm it, then ask if they have any questions. If they do, go to the knowledge base. If they don't, thank the user, inform them of the next steps, and then end the call. So I hope this gives a good overview of what can actually go in on the back end to actually make one of these agents actually work.
All right, and absolutely shameless plug here, but if you are a business owner and you look at this whole process and it looks way too complicated or convoluted, but you know for sure you need this in your business, then Inbound Agent is something that we offer, which is our hero service for building fully managed voice agents.
One thing to keep in mind is we actually have 2 separate services. So if you're looking for something on the low end just to sort of get in the market because you're seeing all your competitors do it, we have the fully managed version. We can start as low as like $500 a month. Or if you want to actually own all the IP and maybe even resell it to your partners, or if you're an agency looking to build these for other companies, we also have full handoff service where we build the whole thing, give you the keys to it, give you the documents, and you're off to the races.
And that's pretty much it. We'll go right back to the video.
So that was the lengthiest part. I promise the rest is a bit more overview level. So that's bland for you. If I go back, the next one on the chopping block is Vapy. Vapy is a great system. We've used it a lot as well. Where I really like Vapy is on the latency side of things, meaning it's quick. So for anything that you're doing like outbound, let's say, like I mentioned earlier, where you need people, it's not necessarily about the complexity of the conversation, it's just keeping the conversation going. Vapy has great latency. Some pros, some cons. One of the biggest pros that a lot of people seem to enjoy is the ability to bring your own models. So compared to Bland, where it's meant to be the Apple of the voice agent world, Vapy would be something like the Android, where everything is customizable. You can bring your own LLMs. You can use different LLMs like Grok, the Anthropic models, the OpenAI models, etc. You have full freedom in all 3 of the agents. So from the transcriber or the speech to text, the LLM or the text to text, as well as the text to speech, meaning you can choose which model you want to use for each one. Best latency that I've seen so far. However, there is a big con here, coding. It is probably the most code intensive one by far. Some of the tools you cannot do without code. Like for example, if you need to have multiple transfer, let's say you have a receptionist for 5 different numbers you need to transfer to. The only way to do that is through API requests to Vapy, which aren't super complex, but if you've never coded or if you're uncomfortable with it, it can be a big barrier to it. Here's one thing to keep in mind that I didn't touch on a lot earlier. Well, I did, but it was not in this aspect. One of the things we use Vapy for, or one of the things a system you're going to need in order to book appointments, looks like this. The user would interact with your agent. In this case, it's Vapy. Vapy will then interact with the automation platform. Let's say it's Make, Zapier, even be custom code if you'd like. And then, in order to actually be able to book appointments, this needs to be connected to some sort of CRM. It needs to be able to check a calendar. Otherwise, it'll just start making events up, or it'll just say, well, I have no events because it's not connected to any calendar. Now, probably the most popular CRMs are GHL, HubSpot, Zoho. You can actually work with any system. There is a big caveat here, a big asterisk. It completely depends on their API. Meaning some systems, especially like more niche systems, have zero API at all. And some of them, like GHL or HubSpot, are basically API driven. Or basically you can do anything and everything with their API. And that covers Vapy. I do have one agent here. Let me show you what actually Vapy looks like. So log into the Vapy dashboard. Like Mark was saying earlier, it's basically just a big prompt. And here you can actually choose a bunch of different settings. So on the right-hand side, this is where I can actually choose the LLM, so the text-to-text model. I can choose OpenAI, Vapy, Together AI, Anyscale, etc. Custom LLM if I want to. Within OpenAI, I can also choose the different sort of models to use. In this case, I've got 4.0, 4.0 Mini, 3.5, Turbo, as well as 4 Turbo. In most cases, unless you need a massive amount of knowledge, 4.0 Mini is by far the best one because it gets you the best balance between intelligence and latency, which is huge for outbound. Because what will happen is somebody you'll call And they keep in mind, most people aren't expecting an AI to call them. So they'll receive the call. If it takes too long though to respond, they'll just hang up because they'll be like, hello, and then it'll try to respond. But if it takes just a slight too long, they'll think, oh, maybe they're having some connection issues, and they'll just hang up. So it's really important if you're doing outbound for somebody who's not expecting the call. Latency is the biggest focus you should have. Then I can go on to transcribers, choose whichever one I want to, Deep Gram, Transcriber, Gladiator, etc. Change different voices down here. Functions as well, but basically function is just tool calling. So, API requests, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I'd say like the most annoying thing if you don't know anything about this platform is if you go back to the transcriber, the voice, Taha, you don't know yet which is the best provider. DeepGram is usually the best one. So if you go to, let's say, voice, you don't know necessarily what Play HT means, let alone how it functions. So if you're first starting this, there's a lot of trial and error to understand what voices can you really depend on. What voices give you that good balance of human-like, but they're also soft-spoken and empathetic. So it's really a hodgepodge of different parameters that you're setting in Vapy to get it to work exactly what you're looking for.
And each one of these impact latency. So you see the bar at the top, this gives you constant latency. If I do Play HT, it gives me 750 milliseconds. If I do Cartesia, or let's choose one like 11 Labs, well, now that just jumped into 900 milliseconds. And then taking a step even further, each of these models can have like sub-models, or each of these companies have different models. So multilingual V2 now jumped to 1700. And this is only in the web version. So if I actually want to deploy this on the phone, we'll now jump to 2.2 seconds to respond. So there is definitely a lot of trial. Go ahead.
No, and as you keep adding on, it might eventually take one business day to get a response to something you say on the phone. So it's really important, especially when you have something as robust and potent as Vapy, that you understand which levers you're clicking, because you might end up at a Amazon Prime delivery conversation between question and answer.
So there's definitely a lot of trial and error here, which is one of the things I do like about Bland, meaning it restricts, because they're all building their stuff in-house, there's less things that can go wrong, right? It just builds, you're using their models and they'd be like, hey, look, this is the best for our platform. But obviously different people have different use cases. And then in the middle, you basically just have a gigantic prompt, which tells it everything that it needs to do. So in this case, this is actually a continuing with the plastic surgery office. Let's say we have a newsletter. And every time that this newsletter goes out, some people might be or might want to come in for a consultation, right? That CTA within the email says, reply to this if you want a coupon or a free consult. Well, this automated caller actually calls people who reply to said email. Now, how to actually get that system working is beyond the scope of this video, but the point is you can now automate that system to get free consults without spending your staff's time calling people who said they were interested in this. And all of the links to this prompt will be in the description below if you want to actually go ahead and use it, because this is a really cool use case that anybody can implement, especially if you already have people and their email address.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the Figma, the actual PowerPoint we put together, and the Bland builder we're going to show you, all of that's going to be available in the Gumroad in the description below. If you want to support the channel, we love you. Otherwise, take it on the house and enjoy.
And that was 1,000-foot view level of Vapy. Now, zooming out here a little bit, we've now covered Syflo, we've covered Bland, we've covered Vapy. Now, there is one new kid on the block, a new challenger that has arose in the last week, and I'll actually let Mark talk about it, which is the Realtime API.
Yeah, so if you're new to the channel, brand new, then I did record a video a few days ago on how anyone can set up and use the Realtime API. It's OpenAI's best foot forward to do a speech-to-speech model for this conversational use case. And what I'm going to show you is a bit of a preview of what it looked like in terms of how much work it takes if you have zero coding knowledge to get this up and running. And we'll show you a demo to show you immediately by practice what the pros and cons of using that service is. All right, and although in that video I tried to make it as easy as possible to have literally just entering a key and clicking a few buttons to deploy it, end of the day, unlike the platforms we just showed you, this is at the lowest level in terms of how much code there is behind the scenes that needs to be configured. Now, if you didn't watch that video, I highly recommend that you do, because I show you how I put this together, and you'll also have the link in that description on how to replicate this on your end. But we basically created a little command center, because otherwise you'd have to go into the code and actually edit the prompt, edit how much the latency should be, etc., which is super annoying, especially if this is intimidating to you, which even to ourselves as programmers, is intimidating to us. So if we go here and we make this something random and we say, you are a travel guide for Paris, you answer questions about attractions and help make travel day plans. You are super friendly. And then we click on update configuration, and then it's now updated. And Taha, if you give it a call, we'll be able to quickly demo how this sounds like.
Let's do it. What are some good attractions
How can I help
in
you
Paris?
plan your trip to Paris today? Are you looking for recommendations on attractions, help with travel plans, or something else? Paris is filled with iconic attractions. Here are some must-see places. Eiffel Tower. No visit to Paris is complete without seeing this iconic landmark. You can enjoy the view from the ground or go up to the viewing platform.
What language do they
for a
speak in
panoramic
Paris?
view of the city. Louvre Museum.
Hello.
Home to thousands of works of art, including
Okay, I'll spare the audience the suffering of that.
Yeah. So the one thing about the real-time API is, for all the hype that it gets, honestly, it's not that good. Now, obviously, I can play around with these parameters here as to, like, how long does it take for the silence to wait before you can interrupt it, and then it recovers and goes back and forth. But the real-time API doesn't really function, at least right now, like it does on your phone, where it's a much more conversational experience and it's built into ChatGPT. So this might be a problem, or not a problem, a big challenger for these competitors later. At this particular moment in time, this is cool to play around with and see what could be, but it has not gone deep as these other platforms have. So as a business owner, if this makes it sound like it's much more approachable to build for you, maybe if you go into the actual playground and have a conversation with it, again, you can get exposed to what a service like this might look like. So if you actually go to the playground, OpenAI, and then we go into chat playground, and then you'll see this little icon here that lets you have real-time conversations. You can absolutely go into here, say, create an agent for my plastic surgery clinic in Montreal called, I forgot what it's called. Dr. MOK Clinic, right? And you click create. This is a new feature they added where it'll write the prompt for you, which is super cool. And in this case, we can take out the create part. And then assuming this is what you have, you can click save, and then you can actually have a back and forth conversation with it. So again, super cool, quote unquote, to tinker with, but it's not ready for prime time yet, and it probably won't be for a few months. And one more important component is cost. Right now, a lot of people are obsessing on how to use this and how to build with it, but it's going to quickly put you out of business if you have very long conversations and hundreds of people calling it. And from that one conversation there, you'll see that even its sensitivity to that back and forth, the way it opens, there's a bit of slight latency. And what that latency is this code, or wherever you deploy that code, having a conversation or sending that hook to Twilio. And you'll see here, that's where the URL of the service is actually going. This is like called a handoff in a way, where that URL is being handed off to Twilio. And what's happening in the real-time API is you have something called a WebSocket, where unlike an API, a WebSocket's live, which is why you can have a back and forth speech-to-speech conversation. There's no request sent, request interpreted, response created, response sent. It is live, which is why you can have a lot of mishaps. And if you're a business owner, you want to minimize the amount of mishaps that you can get. And you can see, we talked about Vapy, we talked about Bland. There's already 100 different ways that your agent can fall. You ideally don't want to go with something experimental and expensive to the market just because it's cool, versus something that's more tried and true. And all of the companies we actually mentioned have raised millions of dollars to solve this one problem, which is, how do you build the best voice agent in the least amount of time?
What I'm excited for the OpenAI's real-time thing is where it'll be in 6 months, where it'll be in a year, right? Because this is their first legitimate attempt to build voice agents themselves. So if you're looking to build these, this is great for exposure. I mean, if you've never heard about voice agents and this is the first time you hear about them, that's great. But they are nowhere near ready for deployment, at least not the real-time API one. Bland, Vapy, Syflo, all of these have been deployed in the field for, I mean, if not now probably a year now. So they've had the time to actually mature and deal with all of the edge cases like tools and interruption thresholds and all of that OpenAI is now just dipping their toes in. So it's cool, but it's not ready for deployment just yet.
Yeah, there's one thing about OpenAI when it comes to building products for scale is they build a lot of toys or a lot of half-built bridges where you can use it to build something cool. But for that cool thing to expand to hundreds of thousands of people, you probably have to add your own custom code. You have to build your own crutches to compensate for the fringe cases they haven't looked out for. So like Taha said, if in doubt, go with a voice platform provider, especially given that some of them, such as, for example, Vapy, I hear, are going to integrate the real-time API as a part of their build. So you as the consumer shouldn't have to worry about building what I built in Replit with all this custom code. Lean on the actual providers to do the heavy work and the grunt work to integrate these new things into their products to make them better. And that's pretty much it. I know this is a bit more of a lengthy video, but hopefully it was worth it to go through all the different tools, what a voice agent is, going from zero to ideally hero in terms of your understanding of this space. And naturally, in 3 months, it might be appropriate for us to do this again from how fast things are going, right, Taha?
To fulfill the promise of the beginning of this video, if I was getting started, I would download everything that we spoke about within this video, the Figma board, the prompts themselves. I would dive into one of the 3 platforms. If you have zero coding experience, would sign up for Syflo, build a voice agent, actually talk to it yourself, because watching these videos and experimenting with it on your own are 2 very different things. Get into the space. Everybody's building on it. It's very experimental, but it's also very exciting. So if you're on the edge, just dive in. There's nothing you can lose. And it's only been a positive thing for us.
Yeah, and one big thing that we're betting on, which is why we started Inbound Agent and why we're going so deep on the voice agent space, is we think that 3 to 4 years from now, 80 to 90% of businesses, at least in North America, are going to have a voice agent first system. So why wait until it's mainstream? Be an early to mid adopter, start integrating into your business, and start reaping the rewards of what this whole AI frontier has to offer. All right, guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. And leave any comments below if you have any specific requests you'd like us to really dive deeper in from everything we've gone through in this video.
Mark, thank you for having me. Everybody else, thank you for watching and keep building.
Cheers.